The Parent Trap is a 1998 American family comedy film produced by Walt Disney Pictures and released under the Walt Disney Company banner. The film was directed by Nancy Meyers, a filmmaker known for her warm, emotionally layered storytelling and sharp comedic sensibility. The screenplay was written by Nancy Meyers and Charles Shire, a longtime creative partnership that had produced some of the most beloved family-oriented Hollywood films of their era. The film is an official remake of the 1961 Disney classic of the same name, which itself was based on the 1949 German novel, Lottie and Lisa, written by Eric Kastner. That original story had already proven its timeless emotional appeal across decades and languages, and by the late 1990s, Disney saw a perfect opportunity to reintroduce the concept to an entirely new generation of audiences. Nancy Meyers approached the remake not as a simple retread but as a The film was produced by Charles Shire and Nancy Meyers, with Bruce A. Block serving as a producer as well. The production was distributed by Buena Vista Pictures Distribution, the theatrical arm of Disney at the time. Filming took place across multiple locations, including the United States and the United Kingdom. Origin note. The story traces its roots to Eric Kastner's 1949 novel, Lottie and Lisa, which was first adapted into a film in Germany in 1950, then by Disney in 1961. And again in this beloved 1998 version directed by Nancy Meyers. Plot: the full story in detail. The film opens by introducing us to two 11-year-old girls who, at first glance, appear to be completely different people living completely different lives on opposite sides of the world. Annie James is a polished, proper, and cultured young girl who lives in London, England, with her mother, Elizabeth James, a highly successful and internationally recognized wedding gown designer. On the other side of the Atlantic, Hallie Parker is a spirited, tomboyish, and free-spirited California girl who lives on a beautiful Napa Valley vineyard with her father, Nick Parker, a charming and successful winemaker. Neither girl has ever met the other, and neither knows that the other exists. The story truly begins when both Annie and Hallie are sent to the same summer camp, Camp Walden, located in the forests of Maine. Within moments of arriving, the two girls cross paths and are immediately struck by their uncanny physical resemblance to one another. Rather than curiosity drawing them together initially, rivalry does. After a series of pranks, bets, and escalating conflicts, the two girls are disciplined by the camp counselors and forced to share an isolated cabin together for the remainder of the summer as punishment. It is during this reluctant forced cohabitation that everything changes. As they begin to talk, compare photographs, and examine the evidence of their lives side by side, they arrive at an impossible but undeniable conclusion. Annie and Hallie are identical twins. They were separated as infants when their parents divorced, each parent taking one child and choosing never to speak of the other again. Their father took Hallie to California, their mother took Annie to London, and both girls have grown up without ever knowing they had a sister, let alone a twin. Overcome with excitement, disbelief, and a deep emotional hunger for the family they have each been missing, Annie and Hallie quickly hatch a bold and elaborate plan. They will switch places. Annie will go to California pretending to be Hallie, and Hallie will go to London pretending to be Annie. Their ultimate goal is not just to meet the parent they have never known, but to reunite their family by getting their parents back together. They spend the rest of the summer teaching each other everything. Annie teaches Hallie her British accent, mannerisms, and knowledge of their mother's world. Hallie teaches Annie to fence, shoot a bow, and embrace the casual freedom of California life. The switch goes into effect when camp ends. Hallie as Annie flies to London and meets her mother for the first time, and the emotional weight of that reunion, played with careful, restrained beauty, is one of the film's most affecting moments. Meanwhile, Annie as Hallie returns to Napa Valley and meets her father, experiencing for the first time the sun-drenched vineyard life and the warm, playful world her twin grew up in. Complications arrive quickly. Nick Parker has a new girlfriend, Meredith Blake, a young, ambitious, and calculating publicist who has absolutely no interest in children and makes her desire to be rid of them abundantly clear. Annie, posing as Hallie, immediately recognizes Meredith as a threat to any hope of reuniting her parents, and resolves to expose and disrupt the relationship at every turn. She enlists the help of the family's loyal housekeeper Jessie, who secretly knows the switch has occurred but plays along, and the lovable grandfather and grandmother, Charles and Vicky James, who fly over from London as part of the plan. The climax of the film brings both parents together on a luxury cruise ship, the Queen Elizabeth II, where Nick is taking Meredith on a pre-engagement vacation. The twins, now revealed to their parents as having switched, confront the entire situation openly. The emotional confrontation forces Nick and Elizabeth to face not only the deception their daughters have orchestrated but also the unresolved feelings they have carried for each other across more than a decade of separation. Meredith is ultimately exposed for her shallow motivations and expelled from the narrative, in a memorably satisfying scene involving a camping trip gone wrong. The film concludes with Nick and Elizabeth reuniting, the twins finally living as a complete family, and the promise of a future in which no one has to be separated ever again. The ending is warm, unabashedly sentimental, and deeply satisfying, which is precisely why it has endured for so long in the hearts of its audience. Cast: the performances that made it iconic. The cast of The Parent Trap is anchored by one of the most extraordinary debut performances in modern Disney history. Lindsay Lohan, in her very first feature film role at just 11 years of age, plays both Hallie Parker and Annie James simultaneously. Through careful filmmaking techniques, split-screen photography, and a stand-in named Aaron Mackey, Lohan managed to create two entirely distinct characters who inhabited the same frame convincingly. Her comic timing, her natural charisma, and her emotional range in what were genuinely the most demanding scenes of the film, particularly the scenes where the twins interact, were remarkable for someone of her age and experience. The Parent Trap was released theatrically in the United States on July 29, 1998, by Buena Vista Pictures Distribution. It opened to a wide theatrical release and performed exceptionally well at the domestic box office, ultimately grossing over $92 million worldwide against a production budget of approximately $15 million. Making it a considerable commercial success for Disney. The film also received strong critical praise, with reviewers consistently singling out Lindsay Lohan's double performance as the single most impressive element of the production. It holds a strong approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and remains warmly reviewed by critics to this day. The film was later released on VHS and DVD, both of which became strong sellers in the home entertainment market. It has since been made available on Disney's streaming platform, Disney+, where it continues to attract new audiences and reintroduce the story to younger generations who are discovering it for the first time. Section 05. Trailer and promotional information. The official theatrical trailer for The Parent Trap was released by Walt Disney Pictures ahead of the film's July 1998 opening. The trailer leaned heavily into the comedic and heartfelt elements of the story, showcasing the twins' switch, the pranks at summer camp, and the warm, sun-drenched cinematography of the Napa Valley sequences. It introduced audiences to Lindsay Lohan, who was unknown at the time, and highlighted the film's transatlantic flavor by cutting between the contrasting worlds of London and California. The trailer was widely distributed in cinemas and on television throughout the summer of 1998 and helped generate strong pre-release interest. The full official trailer is available on the Walt Disney Pictures official YouTube channel and has accumulated millions of views, continuing to draw in viewers who discover or revisit the film decades later. Section 06. Legacy and cultural impact. Few family films from the 1990s have demonstrated the kind of enduring cultural longevity that The Parent Trap has. More than 25 years after its release, it remains a beloved staple of childhood nostalgia for an entire generation that grew up watching it, and it continues to find entirely new audiences through streaming platforms today. The film is regularly cited in discussions of the greatest Disney live-action films ever made, and Nancy Meyers has spoken about it as one of the works she is most proud of in her career. The film also served as the launching pad for Lindsay Lohan's career, setting her on a path that would make her one of the most talked about young actresses of the early 2000s. The role remains her most celebrated performance, and the film is frequently returned to in retrospectives about her career and talent as a child actor. Natasha Richardson's performance as Elizabeth James is equally remembered with great warmth, and following her tragic passing in 2009, The Parent Trap became one of the film's most often cited in tributes to her extraordinary talent and grace as an actress. The film's depiction of Napa Valley helped cement that region as a symbol of a certain kind of idyllic Californian beauty in the popular imagination, and its London sequences, shot on location with Rio British grandeur, gave the film a sense of genuine international scope that was unusual for a family comedy of its budget. The soundtrack, which featured classic songs woven through emotional scenes, has also remained a beloved element of the film's identity. At its core, The Parent Trap endures because it speaks to something universally understood: the longing for a complete family, the love between siblings who find each other against all odds, and the hope that even broken things can sometimes be put back together. It is a film that makes people feel good about the world, and that quality is, ultimately, timeless. Chapter 1. Two Worlds Apart. London, England and Napa Valley, California. The story of The Parent Trap begins not with two children, but with two adults and a love story that went wrong. Nick Parker and Elizabeth James met aboard the Queen Elizabeth II ocean liner, a grand, romantic setting for what would become one of the most consequential meetings of their lives. They fell in love quickly and completely, the kind of love that feels inevitable from the moment it begins. They married, and not long after, they welcomed twin daughters into the world. By all appearances, they had everything. But something between them broke, quietly and irreparably, and the marriage ended before those twin girls were old enough to understand what a family meant. When the divorce was finalized, the decision was made, a decision that would haunt both of them in ways they could never fully articulate: to separate the twins. Each parent took one child. Nick Parker returned to California, to the sun-warmed vineyards of Napa Valley, and he took one daughter with him, Hallie. Elizabeth James returned to London, to her elegant Knightsbridge world of fashion and design, and she took the other daughter with her, Annie. Neither parent spoke of the other child. Neither explained to their daughter that she had a sister. Both girls grew up believing they were each an only child, raised by one parent who loved them completely but who had drawn a curtain over an entire half of their identity. By the time the film opens, the girls are 11 years old and they have become, in almost every way, the products of the entirely different worlds that shaped them. Hallie Parker is all California. She is loose-limbed and confident, comfortable in jeans and flannel, at home on the vineyard, skilled with a fencing foil and a compass and a camping tent. She has her father's easy warmth and his talent for making people feel instantly at ease. She does not know what she is missing, but there is a shape to that absence, a quiet hollow she has never had words for. Annie James, living in London, is almost her polar opposite in manner and presentation. She is measured, precise, beautifully dressed, articulate in the careful way of someone raised around adults who speak with intention. She has inherited her mother's elegance and creative eye. She attends school with other well-bred London children, lives in a warm and tasteful home staffed by a devoted butler named Martin, and she too carries that same hollow shape inside her, that nameless absence, without knowing what it means. 2. Chapter 2. Camp Walden. Maine, United States, Summer Camp. The summer that changes everything begins when both girls are enrolled in the same summer camp, Camp Walden for girls, a sprawling, beautiful camp nestled in the forests of Maine. This is the kind of coincidence that strains belief in real life but feels perfectly right in the world of this story, a detail the film wisely does not dwell on, trusting its audience to accept the magic of it and move forward. Hallie arrives at Camp Walden from California with her characteristic breezy confidence. Annie arrives from London with her characteristic poise. And the moment they catch sight of each other, truly see each other for the first time, the world seems to tip slightly on its axis. They are looking at a mirror. The same face. The same eyes. The same exact shape of nose and chin and forehead. Neither girl has any framework for what she is seeing, and neither is in any mood to explore it peacefully, because what follows first is not warmth or wonder. What follows is rivalry. The details of how their hostility erupts are among the film's most purely entertaining sequences. Hallie, who fences, challenges Annie to a match, and the confrontation between them crackles with competitive energy. Pranks are played. Alliances are formed. The other girls at camp take sides. The mutual antagonism between Hallie and Annie escalates through a series of increasingly brazen provocations. Hallie cuts a hole in Annie's hat. Annie dunks Hallie's expensive duffel bag into a water trough, until the camp counselors finally reach the end of their patience. The punishment assigned to both of them is designed to be deeply unpleasant. Instead of participating in the fun activities of camp, both girls are banished to the isolation cabin, a comfortable but separate little cabin away from the main camp. They are to spend the remainder of the summer there, together, cut off from their friends and their respective social worlds, until they can learn to behave themselves. It is in that small, quiet cabin, stripped of distraction and audience, that two girls who began the summer as enemies slowly begin to understand the most astonishing thing either of them has ever encountered. They are the same person. They are the same blood. They are sisters. 3. Chapter 3. The Discovery. The Isolation Cabin, Camp Walden. The discovery does not happen all at once. It unfolds in layers, like the slow unfolding of something that has always been true but has never been seen clearly before. In the isolation cabin, with no one to perform for and nothing to fight over, Hallie and Annie begin to actually talk to each other. They circle each other cautiously at first, two proud girls unwilling to be the first to show curiosity. But curiosity wins, as it always does. They begin comparing details. They notice that they share the same unusual habit of chewing on the end of a pen when they are thinking. They notice they have the same birth date, the exact same day, month, and year. They begin pulling out photographs. Hallie has a photograph of her father. Annie has a photograph of her mother. They are photographs of a man and a woman who are clearly, unmistakably, the same age and of the same era. And then comes the moment that neither of them can argue away, the torn photograph. Each girl, it turns out, possesses half of the same wedding photograph. Hallie's father and Annie's mother were not two strangers who happened to be photographed separately. They were photographed together. They were married to each other. The truth breaks over them like a wave. They are twins. They were born to the same parents, separated as infants when those parents divorced, and neither of them has ever known the other existed. The enormity of what they are feeling, the grief, the disbelief, the sudden, overwhelming joy of finding someone who is literally the other half of yourself, is handled in the film with remarkable emotional intelligence. Lindsay Lohan, playing both roles, carries the scene with a maturity and depth that is genuinely startling for an 11-year-old in her first film. From that moment, everything between Hallie and Annie transforms completely. The rivalry dissolves as if it had never existed. In its place grows something almost instant and unconditional, the bond of sisters who have lost 11 years together, and are not prepared to lose a single moment more. They talk through the night. They share everything they know about their respective parents, their respective lives, their respective worlds. And as they talk, a plan begins to take shape, audacious, complicated, almost certainly doomed to failure, and absolutely irresistible to two girls who have just discovered they have nothing to lose. 4. Chapter 4. The Great Switch. Camp Walden, final weeks. The plan is this: they will switch places. When summer camp ends, Annie will travel to California as Hallie, and Hallie will travel to London as Annie. Each girl will meet the parent she has never known. And once both parents are in contact again, the twins will find a way to bring them together and undo the separation that has defined all of their lives. The preparation for the switch occupies the final weeks of camp and becomes one of the film's most joyful extended sequences. They have an enormous amount of work to do. Hallie must learn to speak with a British accent, not just a passable imitation but a convincing one, the kind Annie has spoken her entire life. She must learn the names of Annie's friends, the layout of the London house, her mother's routines and preferences, the name of the butler, the way Annie holds herself when she walks into a room. Annie, in turn, must learn to drop her accent entirely and pick up the rhythms of California speech. She must learn to fence, Hallie's passion, and to navigate the vineyard, to talk about wine as though she has grown up around it, to ride horses and pitch tents and be comfortable in a world that is the opposite of everything she knows. They also exchange the small personal objects that will make the deception convincing. Annie gives Hallie her pierced earrings. Hallie gives Annie her compass. They study each other with the intense focus of people who know that the stakes are real. Every mannerism is catalogued and practiced. Every personal habit is shared. They even account for the fact that Hallie's ears are not pierced. Annie will have to wear clip-ons, which she hates, but she does it anyway. The funniest and most touching scenes of this preparation come when each girl's closest camp friends are let in on the secret, and react with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and enthusiastic conspiracy. When camp ends, the switch takes effect. Hallie as Annie boards a flight to London. Annie as Hallie boards a flight back to California. Both girls are flying toward a parent they have never met, armed with 11 years of second-hand knowledge and a great deal of courage dressed up as confidence. V. Chapter 5. Annie in California. Napa Valley, California. Annie, traveling as Hallie, arrives in California and is met by her father, Nick Parker, and the family's housekeeper, Chessie. The reunion, which Nick believes is simply his daughter returning from summer camp, is warm and affectionate, and Annie, seeing her father for the first time in her life, has to hold herself very carefully together. She is meeting a stranger who is her father. She is pretending to be a person she is not. And she is already, from the moment she sees him, falling in love with him in the way children fall in love with parents they discover late. Chessie is a problem almost immediately. She has known Hallie since Hallie was an infant, and she knows her in the deep, instinctive way that people who raise children come to know them, not just their habits and preferences but the specific frequency of who they are. Within moments of Annie's arrival, Chessie knows something is wrong. The girl standing before her looks like Hallie and sounds approximately like Hallie but moves differently, holds herself differently, responds to familiar things with the faint uncertainty of someone encountering them for the first time. Chessie keeps this suspicion to herself for a while, watching, and when she finally confronts Annie privately and the truth comes out, she does not betray the secret. She becomes, instead, an unexpected and deeply loyal ally. The vineyard itself is a revelation to Annie. She has grown up in the elegant urban world of London, and she has never seen anything quite like the sprawling golden beauty of Napa Valley, the rows of vines stretching to the hills, the late afternoon light falling warm and amber over everything, the horses in the paddock, the smell of the earth after rain. She takes it all in with the careful, private wonder of someone who knows she is seeing something that was always supposed to be hers. But California brings with it a complication that changes everything: Meredith Blake. Meredith is Nick's girlfriend, young, striking, ambitious, a publicist who manages his brand and has clearly decided that a future as the wife of a successful Napa winemaker suits her plans very well. She is not, however, interested in the children that come with that future. She makes this clear not through open cruelty but through the specific coldness of someone who has already decided that a certain category of person is beneath her consideration. She is pleasant on the surface and calculating underneath, and Annie sees through her within approximately 10 minutes of their first meeting. Annie embarks on a campaign of resistance and disruption. She finds ways to expose Meredith's shallowness and self-interest to her father, gently but persistently undermining the carefully constructed image Meredith has built. She also begins forming a genuine relationship with her father, getting to know him through daily life on the vineyard, through conversations at dinner, through watching how he moves through his world. Every new thing she learns about him is something she stores carefully, knowing she will one day be able to share it with Hallie. 6. Chapter 6. Hallie in London. Knightsbridge, London, England. In London, Hallie, travelling as Annie, arrives at the beautiful, warm, tastefully appointed home of Elizabeth James. The butler, Martin, meets her at the door, and Hallie navigates the first moments of the deception with the determined boldness that is her natural personality. Elizabeth James is a different kind of figure than Hallie expected. She is not the stiff, formal person that some part of Hallie had perhaps imagined a London fashion designer might be. She is warm, funny, genuinely present, and she has a way of paying attention to her daughter that makes Hallie feel, from the very first evening, as though she is being truly seen. Hallie's first encounter with her mother is the most emotionally layered moment in the entire film. She is meeting her mother for the first time. She cannot say that. She cannot react the way she wants to react. She has to stand in the doorway of that beautiful house and behave as though this woman is someone she has known all her life, when in reality she is standing in the presence of the person whose absence has been the shape of her whole childhood. The scene is played with beautiful restraint, there is grief in it, and there is awe, and there is the effort of enormous self-control, and Lindsay Lohan carries all of it without a false note. The London sequences that follow are full of Hallie discovering the world her twin grew up in, the fashion studio where Elizabeth works, filled with silk and tulle and the quiet intensity of creative work, the grandparents, Charles and Vicky, who are delightful and eccentric and immediately devoted to their granddaughter, the ordered beauty of life in a well-run London household. Hallie, who has lived her whole life in the casual, sun-drenched freedom of California, finds herself unexpectedly charmed by all of it, by the formality that she initially expected to resist, by the particular gentleness of a world built around elegance and care. She also works, with increasing urgency and creativity, to help Annie's plan succeed. She plants seeds in her mother's mind, mentions of California, questions about the past, careful emotional provocations designed to crack open the carefully sealed compartment in which Elizabeth has stored her memories of Nick Parker. And Elizabeth, without fully understanding why, finds herself thinking about the past more than she has in years. Two girls, each living the other's life, were discovering something neither had been prepared for, that they loved both worlds. That both worlds were theirs. And that they wanted, more than anything, to stop choosing between them. 7. Chapter 7. The Reunion Plan. Napa Valley, Parker Vineyard. The switch has served its purpose. Each girl has met the parent she never knew, and each has confirmed what she suspected, that both parents are people worth loving, worth fighting for, worth bringing back together. Now the twins need to end the deception and move to the next phase. They arrange, through careful coordination, for Elizabeth to fly to California on the pretense of seeing her daughter. The grandparents, Charles and Vicky, come along. And the moment Elizabeth's car pulls up to the Parker Vineyard, the plan shifts into its most dangerous and delicate phase. The switch is reversed. Hallie becomes Hallie again, and Annie becomes Annie again, and for a brief, chaotic moment both parents are forced to confront the fact that their daughters have switched places, that both girls have been living the other's life, and that neither of them had any idea. The revelation of the switch is a wonderfully comic scene, but underneath the comedy is something genuinely moving. The realization that these two children loved their parents so much and missed each other so desperately that they engineered an enormously complicated deception simply for the chance to hold their family together. But the reunion plan faces a serious obstacle: Meredith Blake. Nick, despite the girls' best efforts, has not yet seen Meredith clearly, and Meredith is not prepared to allow Elizabeth's presence on the vineyard to threaten what she regards as her future. She turns up her campaign to charm Nick and to subtly diminish the reunion between him and Elizabeth, inserting herself into every shared moment, and doing so with the smooth, practiced ease of someone who is very good at managing perceptions. The twins, now operating openly as a team rather than covertly as individuals, step up their counter-campaign. The most memorable scene in this portion of the film is the camping trip, a disastrous overnight excursion during which Meredith is subjected to a series of perfectly calibrated misfortunes, including her air mattress being deflated overnight, her belongings being hoisted into a tree by a bear, and her hair being covered in honey. The camping trip is played as broad comedy, but it is comedy in service of a clear moral point. Meredith has shown herself to be someone who would rather scheme than love, and the universe, in the form of two extremely motivated 11-year-olds, is declining to cooperate with her. 8. Chapter 8. The Queen Elizabeth II. Atlantic Ocean, aboard the QE2. Nick, apparently unaware of how thoroughly his daughters have assessed and rejected his girlfriend, announces that he is taking Meredith on a cruise aboard the Queen Elizabeth II. It is, the twins understand immediately, the same ship on which their parents first fell in love. Whether Nick has chosen this ship consciously or unconsciously is left beautifully ambiguous. But the twins recognize the significance at once, and they recognize that this is their window. The girls engineer a way to get Elizabeth onto the same ship. They arrange their grandparents' support. They use every connection and piece of leverage at their disposal. And when the QE2 sets sail, both Nick and Elizabeth are aboard it, which means that both of them are returning, whether they know it or not, to the place where everything between them began. The ship sequences are among the most visually beautiful in the film. Nancy Meyers shoots the QE2 with a sense of scale and romance that suits the emotional weight of what is happening aboard it. The corridors and dining rooms and decks of the ship become the stage for a series of carefully orchestrated encounters between Nick and Elizabeth, encounters that the twins have engineered but that quickly take on a life and momentum of their own. Nick and Elizabeth, seeing each other in this context, begin to remember. They remember who they were when they first met aboard a ship like this one. They remember what they felt. They are careful and guarded at first. Both of them have built lives around the careful management of this particular memory. But the setting works on them, and the girls work on them, and something that has been held in check for 11 years begins slowly to move. 9. Chapter 9. The truth comes out. Aboard the QE2, open waters. Meredith, who has been watching the dynamic between Nick and Elizabeth with growing unease, finally reaches her limit. In a pivotal scene, she confronts Nick with an ultimatum: it is her or the girls. She has decided, with the cold clarity of someone who has finally stopped pretending, that she does not want children in her life and does not intend to spend her future navigating the complicated emotional territory of a man who will always, on some level, be tied to the woman he married and the daughters he raised. The ultimatum is delivered with composed viciousness, and it does exactly what Meredith perhaps did not intend. It shows Nick, with absolute clarity, who she really is. Nick's response is quiet and final. He ends the relationship. Not dramatically, not with anger, but with the tired decisiveness of someone who has been shown something he cannot unsee. Meredith exits the story at this point, dismissed not by the girls' pranks or their parents' intervention but by her own willingness to reveal herself. It is one of the most satisfying character exits in the film precisely because it is earned by character rather than circumstance. With Meredith gone, the space between Nick and Elizabeth opens up. The two of them, alone together on the deck of a ship they both remember from a different life, begin to talk in the way they have not talked in 11 years. They talk about what happened between them, not the logistics of the divorce, but the emotional reality of it. They talk about regret. They talk about the years that have passed. And somewhere in that conversation, the carefully maintained distance between them begins to close. The twins, watching from a careful distance and with barely contained excitement, see what is happening. They have been working toward this moment for weeks. They have lied and switched and schemed and camped in the wilderness and gotten honey in someone's hair, all for this, the sight of their parents talking to each other the way people talk when they still care about each other, when the caring has survived everything that was supposed to end it. Chapter 10. Coming Home. London and Napa Valley. Epilogue. The film moves toward its resolution with the unhurried confidence of a story that has earned its happy ending. Nick and Elizabeth reconcile, not instantly and not without the acknowledgement of everything that was lost between them, but genuinely, with the full emotional weight of two people who understand that what they are choosing now is not just each other but the family they should never have dismantled. There is a proposal. It happens in London, in the garden of the James house, surrounded by the beauty and quiet of the life Elizabeth has built, and it is the kind of scene that the film has been building toward from its very first frame. The wedding that follows is a small, warm, private affair, not a grand cinematic spectacle but something more meaningful, a gathering of the people who love this family and who have watched, with varying degrees of patience and conspiracy, as it has been put back together. The twins stand beside their parents. The grandparents, Charles and Vicky, are there. Chessie is there. Martin is there. Everyone who has been part of this story is present for its conclusion. And the conclusion is this: Hallie and Annie Parker James are no longer two girls living separate lives in separate countries, each carrying the shape of an absence they could not name. They are sisters. They are twins. They have a mother and a father who are together again, and they have each other, and they have the extraordinary story of the summer they spent at Camp Walden, and the plan they hatched in an isolation cabin, and the lies they told, and the risks they took, and all the love that drove every bit of it. They have, in short, everything. The Parent Trap ends on a note of pure, uncomplicated happiness, the kind that the film has worked very hard to make feel deserved rather than convenient. It is a happiness rooted in the recognition that families can be broken and can be mended, that love that is real enough does not simply disappear when circumstances turn against it, and that sometimes the most unlikely architects of repair are the people who have the most to gain and the least to lose. Two 11-year-old girls who simply refused to accept that the story of their family was already over. Life histories of the cast. Lindsay Lohan played Hallie Parker and Annie James. Born July 2, 1986. Lindsay D. Lohan was born on July 2, 1986, in New York City, and grew up in Merrick, a suburb on Long Island. She was the eldest of 4 children born to Michael Lohan and Dina Sullivan, and she entered the world of professional performance at an age when most children are still learning to read. By the time she was 3 years old, she had signed with a modeling agency and was appearing in print campaigns and television commercials. She modeled for companies including Calvin Klein Kids and appeared in advertisements for Jell-O alongside Bill Cosby. Her face was on billboards and in catalogs throughout her early childhood, and yet none of it quite prepared the world for what she would do in front of a movie camera when the opportunity finally arrived. That opportunity came in 1998, when director Nancy Meyers cast her, at just 11 years of age, with no previous film experience whatsoever, in the dual role of Hallie Parker and Annie James in The Parent Trap. It was a staggering ask for any child actor. She was required not only to play two distinct characters simultaneously but to share scenes with herself through split-screen photography and a body double named Erin Mackey. The result was one of the most impressive child performances in modern Hollywood history. Critics were astonished by her comic timing, her emotional range, and the clarity with which she differentiated the two characters through body language, accent, and effect alone. The film was a significant box office success, and overnight, Lindsay Lohan became one of the most talked about young talents in the industry. The years that followed The Parent Trap were defined by a remarkable run of commercial and critical success. She appeared in the television film Life Size in 2000 alongside Tyra Banks, then in Get a Clue in 2002. In 2003 she starred in Freaky Friday opposite Jamie Lee Curtis, a comedy that demonstrated she could hold her own against experienced adult performers and that showed audiences she had grown, as a person and as an actress, since The Parent Trap. Freaky Friday was both a critical and commercial success, and it cemented her reputation as one of the most reliable young stars in Hollywood. The following year she appeared in Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, and in 2004 came Mean Girls, written by Tina Fey and directed by Mark Waters. Mean Girls was a cultural phenomenon. It was sharp, funny, socially observant, and Lindsay Lohan's performance, as Katie Heron, was the anchor that held all of it together. The film grossed nearly $130 million worldwide and generated a cultural afterlife that has, remarkably, only grown in the decades since its release. At the peak of her fame, which arrived somewhere around 2004 and 2005, Lindsay Lohan was one of the most recognizable and commercially powerful young actresses in the world. She had a music career that produced a debut album, Speak, in 2004, which sold over 1 million copies and spawned charting singles. She was on magazine covers, on television programs, in newspapers. She was, by any measure, a star of the first order. But the years that followed were marked by a very public and very painful unraveling. She struggled with substance abuse, with the pressures of fame that had been placed on her since she was a toddler in catalog shoots, and with a family environment that generated its own considerable turbulence. Her parents' volatile relationship and her father's legal troubles were regularly in the press. She had multiple arrests and legal proceedings related to driving under the influence and theft. She spent time in court-ordered rehabilitation facilities. Films she was attached to either fell apart in production or were released to devastating reviews. The professional world that had once competed to cast her began to close its doors, and the public conversation about her shifted from admiration to something closer to spectacle. What is often overlooked in the narrative of Lindsay Lohan's public difficulties is the resilience that has defined the second half of her story. She did not disappear. She moved to Europe, spending significant time in London and later in Dubai and Greece, where she rebuilt her life away from the intensity of American tabloid culture. She continued to work, in independent films, in television, in international productions. And then, in 2022, she returned to mainstream Hollywood with the Netflix Christmas romantic comedy Falling for Christmas, which was received warmly by audiences who had followed her entire journey and were pleased to welcome her back. In 2023 she appeared in the Netflix film Irish Wish. She married financier Bader Shamus in 2022, and in 2023 the couple welcomed their first child. Lindsay Lohan, at the time of writing, is in her late 30s, working steadily, and living what appears to be a stable and genuinely happy life. The arc of her story is, in the most meaningful sense, one of survival and return. DQ. Dennis Quaid. Played Nick Parker. Born April 9, 1954. Dennis William Quaid was born on April 9, 1954, in Houston, Texas, the younger brother of actor Randy Quaid. He grew up in a working-class Houston family and attended Bel Air High School, where he developed an interest in theater and performance. He went on to study drama at the University of Houston, though he left before completing his degree when the pull of a professional acting career became impossible to resist. He moved to Los Angeles in the early 1970s, determined to make a life in film, and spent years doing the grinding, unglamorous work of building a career from the ground up: small roles, supporting parts, television appearances, the gradual accumulation of experience and visibility that eventually tips into something larger. His early film work included appearances in pictures like September 30th, 1955 and 1977 and Breaking Away in 1979, a coming-of-age sports film that was well received and helped establish his presence in Hollywood. Through the late 1970s and early 1980s he built a reputation as a talented and reliable actor with genuine charisma and a natural warmth that translated well to the screen. His breakthrough into genuine stardom came with The Right Stuff in 1983, Philip Kaufman's epic chronicle of the American space program, in which Quaid played astronaut Gordon Cooper with considerable energy and charm. The film was a critical success and put Quaid firmly on the map as a leading man. What followed was one of the most interesting and varied careers in modern American cinema. In 1987 he appeared in The Big Easy as a New Orleans detective, a role that drew on his southern roots and demonstrated a relaxed, seductive screen presence that made audiences take notice. In 1989 he starred in Great Balls of Fire, playing rock and roll pioneer Jerry Lee Lewis with full-throttle commitment. He appeared in Inner Space in 1987 and Everybody's All-American in 1988. His range was evident in everything he did. He could play comedy and drama with equal conviction, and he had the kind of face that aged interestingly, becoming more compelling rather than less as the years passed. In the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Dennis Quaid was also open about his struggle with cocaine addiction, which he has described in interviews as having been serious and consuming during the height of his early fame. His recovery and the sustained discipline it required became a defining part of his personal narrative, and he has spoken about it with a candor that has made him a more three-dimensional public figure than many of his contemporaries. His sobriety became the foundation on which the second, arguably more interesting, chapter of his career was built. The Parent Trap in 1998 represented a different kind of role for Quaid: warm, comedic, domestic, a father figure whose easy California charm anchored the film's emotional center without demanding the kind of dramatic heavy lifting that had defined some of his earlier work. He was perfectly cast. After the film, he continued to work at a remarkable pace. In 2000 he starred in Traffic, Steven Soderbergh's multi-narrative drug war epic, which won 4 Academy Awards. In 2004 he appeared in The Day After Tomorrow, a massive commercial success. He starred in Far From Heaven in 2002, and in Good Company in 2004. He appeared in Vantage Point in 2008 and Pandorum in 2009. His television work includes the series Vegas, which ran from 2012 to 2013, and the miniseries Fortitude. In 2019 he starred in the Netflix series The Politician and appeared in a number of high-profile projects. Dennis Quaid has been married several times, to actress P.J. Sauls in the late 1970s, to actress Meg Ryan from 1991 to 2001, a marriage that produced a son, Jack Quaid, who has himself become a successful actor, and subsequently to Kimberly Buffington and Laura Savoy, whom he married in 2020. He is also known for his passion for music, playing in a band called The Sharks for many years, and for his athletic lifestyle, including marathon running and golf. He remains one of Hollywood's most active and enduring leading men, continuing to work prolifically into his 70s. N.R. Natasha Richardson played Elizabeth James. May 11, 1963 to March 18, 2009. Natasha Jane Richardson was born on May 11, 1963, in London, England, into one of the most distinguished theatrical families in British history. Her mother was Vanessa Redgrave, one of the greatest stage and screen actresses of the 20th century. Her father was Tony Richardson, the celebrated film and theatre director whose work defined much of British cinema's new wave in the 1960s. Her aunt was Lynn Redgrave, another acclaimed actress. Her grandfather was Sir Michael Redgrave, a titan of the British stage. To be born into the Richardson-Redgrave family was to be born into an institution, a lineage so steeped in theatrical accomplishment that the question was never whether Natasha would enter the profession but simply when and how. She studied at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, one of the world's most prestigious drama schools, and made her professional stage debut in 1983. Her early theatre work demonstrated immediately that she had not merely inherited a famous name, but had genuine and substantial talent of her own, a quality that in such families is never guaranteed and always matters enormously. She was intelligent, technically accomplished, emotionally available on stage, and possessed of a natural authority that made audiences trust her completely. She worked extensively in theatre throughout the 1980s and earned a reputation as one of the most serious and gifted young stage actresses in Britain. Her film career began to develop alongside her stage work. She appeared in A Month in the Country in 1987, a quiet and beautifully observed film in which she demonstrated the restraint and emotional precision that would become her trademark. In 1988 she starred in Pattyhurst, playing the kidnapped newspaper heiress with unsettling intensity. In 1990 she appeared in The Handmaid's Tale, the adaptation of Margaret Atwood's novel. Her screen presence was immediately distinctive. There was a quality of contained intelligence to everything she did, a sense that her characters were always thinking several things at once and revealing only a portion of them. Her Broadway debut came in 1992 when she starred in Anna Christie, an O'Neill revival that earned her a Tony Award for Best Actress in a Play, a recognition that placed her definitively among the elite of her generation on both sides of the Atlantic. In 1993 she starred in Liam Neeson's film Nell. She won a second Tony Award in 1998 for her role in Cabaret, playing Sally Bowles on Broadway with a raw, complicated vulnerability that was widely considered one of the finest stage performances of that decade. The Parent Trap came the same year, and it represented something genuinely different in her body of work, a warm, mainstream Hollywood family comedy that introduced her to a vastly wider audience than her stage and art house film work had reached. Her performance as Elizabeth James was precisely calibrated, elegant without being cold, funny without sacrificing depth, and genuinely moving in the film's most emotional moments. She married Liam Neeson in 1994, and the couple had 2 sons together, Michael, born in 1995, and Daniel, born in 1996. By all accounts the marriage was a genuinely happy and deeply loving one, a rarity in a profession that tests relationships severely. The family divided their time between New York and Ireland, and Richardson continued to work in theatre and film while raising her children with what those who knew her describe as the same attention and seriousness she brought to everything in her life. On March 16, 2009, while taking a skiing lesson at the Mont Tremblant Resort in Quebec, Canada, Natasha Richardson suffered a traumatic brain injury after a fall on a beginner slope. She did not lose consciousness immediately and initially declined medical attention, but within hours she developed a severe headache and was taken to hospital. She was transferred to Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City, where she died on March 18, 2009, at the age of 45, with her husband and family at her side. The shock of her death reverberated throughout the theatrical and film world with an intensity that reflected how deeply she was respected and loved by her peers. Liam Neeson has spoken movingly about her in the years since, and the affection with which the Parent Trap audiences remember her performance is inseparable from the grief of knowing how much more she would have given the world had she lived. Natasha Richardson came from the greatest theatrical dynasty in British history, and she honored that inheritance every time she walked onto a stage or in front of a camera. Her death at 45 remains one of the most painful losses that the world of performance has suffered in the modern era. E.H. Elaine Hendrix played Meredith Blake. Born February 28, 1970. Elaine Hendrix was born on February 28, 1970, in Millington, Tennessee, a small town near Memphis. She grew up in a Southern environment and developed an interest in performance from an early age, pursuing drama through school and eventually making her way to professional training and then to Los Angeles, where she began building a career in the highly competitive world of Hollywood acting. Her early work consisted of the small roles and television appearances that form the necessary foundation of almost every working actor's biography: guest appearances on television series, minor film roles, the steady accumulation of craft and presence that eventually distinguishes those who persist from those who give up. Her film debut came with a small role in Inspector Gadget, the movie, and she built her resume steadily through the mid-1990s with appearances in a variety of television productions. She had a recurring role in the television series Jenny and appeared in a number of other projects before landing the role that would define her place in popular culture: Meredith Blake in The Parent Trap in 1998. The casting was inspired. Meredith Blake is a particular kind of cinematic villain, not genuinely evil but deeply, specifically selfish, the kind of person who has convinced herself that her motivations are reasonable while pursuing outcomes that are entirely self-serving. She is also, crucially, funny, and Elaine Hendrix played her with a comic precision that made Meredith one of the most memorable antagonists in Disney's live-action catalog. The camping trip sequence in particular, in which Meredith is subjected to a series of humiliations orchestrated by the twins, gave Hendrix an opportunity for broad physical comedy that she seized with evident delight. The role of Meredith Blake gave Elaine Hendrix a level of recognition that her earlier work had not, and she built on it steadily in the years that followed. She appeared in the film Inspector Gadget and in a variety of television productions through the late 1990s and 2000s. She had a recurring role in the television series Reba and appeared in numerous other series and films over the following 2 decades. She has continued to work consistently in both film and television, and she has also become known as a passionate and vocal advocate for animal rights. She is involved with a number of organizations dedicated to animal welfare and speaks publicly and frequently about the issue. She has never married and has spoken about choosing a life structured around her work and her advocacy rather than conventional domestic arrangements. Elaine Hendrix remains one of those actors whose face and whose most famous role, Meredith Blake, forever scheming, forever being outwitted by 2 11-year-olds, have lodged permanently in the cultural memory of everyone who grew up watching The Parent Trap. L.W. Lisa and Walter played Chessie. Born August 13, 1963. Lisa and Walter was born on August 13, 1963, in Washington, D.C., and grew up in the Maryland suburbs of the capital. She was drawn to performance and comedy from childhood and pursued it through her school years and into a professional career that began on the stand-up comedy circuit, a training ground that shaped her comic instincts in ways that would serve her throughout her career. Stand-up comedy demands a particular kind of discipline and courage. You stand alone in front of an audience with nothing but your timing and your material, and the feedback is immediate and unambiguous. The comedians who survive and flourish in that environment develop a quality of presence and an instinct for rhythm that is difficult to teach and impossible to fake. Lisa and Walter worked the comedy club circuit through the late 1980s and early 1990s, building her stand-up act and developing the sharp, warm, working-class comic persona that would eventually translate so well to the screen. She began appearing in television during this period, with guest roles and supporting appearances in various series, and her film career began to develop alongside her stand-up work. She appeared in Eddie in 1996, playing a supporting role alongside Whoopi Goldberg in a basketball comedy that gave her a visible film credit and some experience working at a larger scale of production. The role of Chessie in The Parent Trap in 1998 was the role that introduced her to a mass audience. Chessie, the Parker family's devoted, perceptive, and thoroughly lovable housekeeper, is a character who could easily have been a minor supporting presence, but Lisa and Walter brought to her a warmth and a specificity that made her one of the film's most beloved figures. Her comedic chemistry with the young Lindsay Lohan was genuine and electric, and her scenes, particularly the moment when she realizes the switch has occurred and quietly becomes the twins' co-conspirator, are among the most emotionally satisfying in the entire film. She played Chessie not as a stock comedy character but as a real person with real loyalty and real love for the family she had spent years serving, and that commitment to the reality of the character elevated every scene she appeared in. After The Parent Trap, Lisa and Walter continued to work in television and film, appearing in a variety of projects through the 2000s and 2010s. She had a recurring role in the television series Life's Too Short and appeared in numerous other television productions. She continued performing stand-up comedy throughout this period, maintaining the live performance practice that had formed the foundation of her career. In more recent years she has become well known to a new generation of television audiences through her role as Melissa Scamenti on the ABC series Abbott Elementary, which premiered in 2021 and became one of the most critically acclaimed comedies of its era. Her performance in Abbott Elementary drew widespread praise, with critics noting her ability to play a character of genuine comic complexity, brash and warm, defensive and deeply kind, with the kind of naturalness that only comes from decades of accumulated craft. The show won multiple Emmy Awards, and Lisa and Walter's contribution to its success has been recognized as central rather than peripheral. It is, in many ways, the role that has shown the full range of what she can do, and it has introduced her to an audience that may now discover, with considerable delight, the warmth and comedy she brought to Chessie in The Parent Trap nearly 3 decades earlier. Budget, money and funny moments on set. The Parent Trap was made on a budget of approximately $15 million, a figure that, by the standards of a major Disney live-action production in 1998, was considered relatively modest. Walt Disney Pictures had not invested in a sprawling, effects-heavy blockbuster budget because the film did not need one. Nancy Meyers and producer Charles Shire were known for making character-driven, dialogue-heavy comedies that derived their value from performance and writing rather than spectacle, and Disney trusted them to deliver a quality product without extravagance. What made the budget particularly challenging, however, was one technical requirement that no other family film of that era had attempted at quite the same scale. Lindsay Lohan had to share the screen with herself. Playing both Hallie and Annie simultaneously required an elaborate system of split-screen photography, precise camera positioning, a body double named Aaron Mackey who stood in for whichever twin was off-camera in any given shot, and meticulous continuity work to ensure that the two halves of every twin scene matched perfectly in lighting, eyeline, and movement. This technical challenge consumed a significant portion of the production's time, energy, and resources. Every scene involving both twins took far longer to shoot than a conventional scene of equivalent length, because each shot had to be filmed twice, once with Lohan playing Hallie, and once with Lohan playing Annie, and the two passes had to align with mechanical precision in the editing room. Cast salaries, all actors combined, $4.5 million. Split-screen VFX and twin photography, $2.5 million. Location filming, London and Napa Valley, $2.8 million. Set construction and production design, $1.8 million. Costumes, hair, makeup, $900K. Music, score and licensing, $800K. Catering, transport, logistics, $700K. Marketing and theatrical distribution, $25 million. The marketing budget, which Disney kept separate from the production budget, as is standard industry practice, is estimated to have been in the range of $25 million. This covered the theatrical trailer campaign, television advertising across American networks, billboard and print placements, press junkets, and the international promotional rollout. When you factor in marketing costs alongside the $15 million production budget, Disney's total investment in the film was closer to $40 million. Against that investment, the film's worldwide gross of $92 million represented a very healthy return. The film opened at number 2 at the U.S. box office in its debut weekend, earning just over $11 million domestically in its first 3 days of release, and it held its audience well across the summer of 1998. By the time the theatrical run concluded, it had earned Disney a comfortable profit, and that was before home video, DVD sales, television licensing, and eventually streaming revenue were counted. On the home entertainment market, The Parent Trap was a significant seller. It became one of Disney's reliable backlist titles, a film that families returned to repeatedly across formats as technology changed, and those cumulative revenues across VHS, DVD, and streaming have made it one of the more profitable mid-budget productions in the studio's live-action catalog. One of the most talked about budgetary facts surrounding the film is what Lindsay Lohan was paid for her work. As a complete unknown with no film credits, she was not in a position to command a significant salary, and her fee for The Parent Trap was reported to be in the range of $150,000, a number that, in the context of what the film went on to earn, looks rather small. By the time of her next major Disney film, however, her salary had increased dramatically, reflecting her new status as one of the studio's most valuable young assets. The London location filming presented its own specific budgetary pressures. Shooting on location in a major city always costs more than studio work, because the logistics of managing crew, equipment, permits, and the general unpredictability of real environments adds layers of expense that a controlled studio stage does not. The scenes filmed in and around London, including exterior shots of the Knightsbridge area and the sequences inside and around the James family home, required careful coordination with British location managers and local authorities, and the costs of housing and transporting the American crew in London for several weeks added meaningfully to the overall bill. The Napa Valley sequences were somewhat more straightforward logistically, though the vineyard itself required dressing and preparation to achieve the specifically golden, cinematic version of wine country that the production design team had in mind. Funny, chaotic and memorable moments on set. A film set is a strange and often hilariously unglamorous environment, and The Parent Trap, despite the polished warmth of its finished product, generated its fair share of chaos, laughter, and incidents that never made it into any press release. What follows is a detailed account of the funniest and most memorable behind-the-scenes stories from the production. Incident number 01. Split-screen chaos. The day Lindsay Lohan confused herself with herself. Shooting the twin scenes required Lindsay to play one character, complete the shot, then switch costumes, adjust her accent and body language, and play the opposite character for the second pass. The technical crew had to be extraordinarily precise about where every object on set had been positioned, because the two passes needed to match perfectly in the edit. On multiple occasions during production, Lindsay, after hours of switching back and forth between Hallie and Annie dozens of times in a single day, would momentarily lose track of which character she was currently supposed to be playing. She would begin speaking in the wrong accent mid-take, or adopt the wrong posture, and the entire set would dissolve into laughter. Director Nancy Meyers described these moments in interviews as both maddening and completely endearing, because they were a reminder of the sheer cognitive and physical workload that an 11-year-old was carrying with remarkable good humor. The crew developed an informal system of color-coded prop signals to help Lohan orient herself at the start of each take, a detail that says everything about the collective effort the production put into making the impossible look effortless on screen. Incident number 02. The honey problem. Elaine, Hendrix, and the camping trip that kept going wrong. The camping trip sequence, in which Meredith Blake is subjected to a series of increasingly humiliating misfortunes orchestrated by the twins, was one of the most technically demanding and logistically complicated sequences in the entire film. It required careful coordination of practical effects, and the honey scene in particular was a production nightmare disguised as a comedy set piece. Elaine Hendrix, who played Meredith, had to have real honey applied to her hair for the sequence. Honey, as anyone who has ever worked with it will tell you, is one of the most stubborn substances known to the cosmetics and hair departments of any film production. It does not wash out easily. It attracts insects. It gets warmer and stickier under film lighting. After multiple takes of the honey sequence, the hair and makeup team were spending enormous amounts of time between each take attempting to manage Hendrix's hair, and she reportedly spent an entire afternoon with honey in increasingly improbable locations on her person. She has spoken about this experience in interviews with a mixture of professional resignation and genuine laughter, noting that there are certain sacrifices the craft of acting requires that drama school simply does not prepare you for, and that spending a day covered in honey on a California hillside is very much one of them. Incident number 03. The accent coach. Teaching an American child to sound British, and then immediately teaching her to stop. One of the most quietly heroic people on the entire production was the dialect coach hired to teach Lindsay Lohan a convincing British accent for the role of Annie James. This coach spent weeks with Lohan drilling the precise vowel sounds, the rhythm of British speech, the specific Knightsbridge quality of Annie's English that would differentiate her from Hallie's California drawl. The work paid off. Lohan's British accent in the film is entirely convincing. The comedic problem, however, was what happened between takes and between scenes. Lohan, being 11 years old and utterly dedicated to the work, found that the British accent began to bleed into her off-camera speech after hours of practice. On multiple occasions she would deliver a line in character, here, cut, and then continue speaking in her British accent to the crew around her while discussing lunch or asking where the bathroom was. She was reportedly unaware she was doing it, which made it funnier rather than less so. Natasha Richardson, who was actually British, found this particularly amusing and was known to respond to Lohan's inadvertent mid-set British accent by complimenting it in her own naturally authoritative English voice, which sent the rest of the cast and crew into fits. Incident number 04. Dennis Quaid's vineyard education. The actor who had to learn about wine very quickly and very thoroughly. Dennis Quaid plays Nick Parker, a Napa Valley winemaker, with such convincing ease and knowledge in the finished film that audiences might reasonably assume he came to the production with some background in viticulture. He did not. In preparation for the role, Quaid was sent to spend time at actual Napa Valley vineyards, learning the vocabulary of winemaking, the rhythms of vineyard life, and the specific way that a person who has grown up around wine talks about it, casually, specifically, without pretension. He approached this research with genuine enthusiasm, which the vineyard owners and winemakers he visited found both flattering and slightly concerning given the research methodology. By the end of his preparation period he had developed a genuinely informed understanding of California wine, which served his performance beautifully. What also served the general mood on set was that Quaid, having spent weeks immersed in wine culture, became the unofficial sommelier of the production, offering detailed and entirely unsolicited commentary on the wine at every catered event and crew dinner throughout the shoot. The crew found this alternately informative and extremely funny, particularly because Quaid delivered these wine notes with the exact same warm, easy confidence he brought to Nick Parker. Incident number 05. Nancy Meyers vs. the bear. When a prop-bear interaction created genuine on-set panic. The camping trip sequence required not just honey and deflated air mattresses but also the involvement of a bear, or rather, a trained animal actor playing the role of the bear that discovers Meredith's honey-covered belongings. Working with animal actors on a film set is governed by strict animal welfare protocols and requires the presence of certified animal trainers at all times, which the production fully observed. The bear in question was a professional, experienced, trained, and reliable under normal circumstances. However, film sets are not always normal circumstances. During one particular take, a piece of equipment made an unexpected noise that startled the bear at precisely the wrong moment, causing it to move in a direction that was not in the shot plan and briefly turn its attention toward a section of the crew that had perhaps grown slightly too comfortable with its proximity. The resulting scramble, entirely undignified, involving several very experienced film professionals moving with a speed they may not have achieved since childhood, was witnessed by the entire cast and became one of the most frequently recounted stories from the production. No one was hurt. The bear was fine. Nancy Meyers reportedly took a very long breath, asked everyone to reset, and continued to shoot with the quiet determination that is the defining characteristic of an experienced director. Incident number 06. Lisa and Walter and the accidental dialect. The housekeeper who kept making the director laugh at the wrong moments. Lisa and Walter, who plays Chessie, came to the role from a background in stand-up comedy, and her instinct for improvisation was both a tremendous asset to the production and, on certain days, a source of considerable disruption. Walter had a habit, common among comedians who have spent years on stage reading and responding to live audiences, of adding small improvisational flourishes to her lines that were not in the script. Many of these were genuinely funnier than what had been written, and Nancy Meyers used them. Others sent the cast into laughter at moments when the scene required them to maintain composure, particularly in scenes where Chessie's deadpan reactions to increasingly absurd events needed to land with precise timing. Lindsay Lohan was particularly susceptible to breaking into laughter when Walter improvised, and there are reportedly many unusable takes in which Lohan, who was supposed to be maintaining her composure as Annie playing Hallie, simply cannot stop laughing at whatever Lisa and Walter has just done or said. Walter has described the shoot as one of the most enjoyable of her career, in part because she was working with people who genuinely found each other funny. Incident number 07. The fencing problem. Teaching an 11-year-old to fence convincingly, in 2 different styles. The fencing sequence near the beginning of the film, in which Hallie and Annie face each other across a fencing strip for what becomes their first real confrontation, required Lindsay Lohan to learn the fundamentals of competitive fencing. She had to be trained to handle a foil competently enough that the sequence would be convincing on screen. This training took several weeks and was delivered by a fencing instructor hired specifically for the production. The complication was that Lohan, having learned enough fencing to perform the scene credibly, then became enthusiastically interested in the sport in a way that the production schedule had not entirely planned for. She would practice between takes with whatever fencing equipment was in reach, occasionally surprising crew members who were not expecting to be lightly jabbed with a practice foil while reviewing their notes. The fencing instructor reportedly found this entirely charming. The crew found it intermittently startling. Lohan apparently found it tremendously enjoyable, which is visible in the genuine confidence and energy she brings to the fencing sequence in the finished film. Nancy Meyers has said in multiple interviews that the funniest days on any set she has ever run were the days when she was directing an 11-year-old who was also essentially directing herself, because the nature of the split-screen work meant that Lindsay Lohan had to watch her own performance in one half of the frame and react to it in real time in the other, which required a level of self-awareness and technical discipline that most professional adult actors would find demanding. Incident number 08. The Quaid shoot. Filming on an actual ocean liner while the ocean liner was actually sailing. The climactic sequences of the film take place aboard the Queen Elizabeth II ocean liner, and the production actually filmed aboard the real Quaid, not a studio recreation of it, and not while it was docked safely in a harbor, but while it was at sea. Filming on a moving ship at sea is one of the more logistically complicated environments a film crew can work in. Because the ship moves, the light changes constantly depending on the ship's heading relative to the sun, and the ocean has a generally unpredictable attitude toward anyone who has brought expensive camera equipment onto its surface. The crew dealt with seasickness, with equipment that had to be carefully secured at all times, and with the specific challenge of shooting scenes that were supposed to feel romantically luminous and cinematically beautiful in an environment that was also sometimes bouncing. The actors, to their considerable credit, managed to deliver performances of genuine emotional weight in conditions that the crew around them found rather more difficult to manage with composure. Dennis Quaid, it should be noted, was reportedly fine throughout. Quaid, who is an outdoor sportsman and a physically adventurous person, appeared to find the experience of filming on the open ocean entirely pleasant, a fact that his seasick colleagues found absolutely infuriating in the most affectionate possible way. Cultural and historical context. Part 1. Historical origins. A story 75 years in the making. To understand the cultural and historical weight of the 1998 Parent Trap, you have to begin not in Hollywood but in Germany, in the years immediately following the Second World War. In 1949, a German author named Erich Kästner published a children's novel called Das Doppellottchen, which translates into English as The Double Lottie or Lottie and Lisa. Kästner was one of the most important and morally serious German authors of the 20th century, a writer who had lived through the Nazi period, whose books had been publicly burned by the regime in 1933, and who had nonetheless stayed in Germany throughout the war years as a form of personal witness to what his country was doing to itself. When the war ended and he returned to writing for children, his work carried within it an awareness of loss, of families torn apart by historical catastrophe, and of the desperate human longing for reunion and wholeness that post-war Europe felt with a particular acuteness. Das Doppellottchen is the story of two girls who meet at a summer camp and discover they are twins whose parents divorced and separated them in infancy. The parallels to the 1998 film are exact because the 1998 film is directly descended from Kästner's story, through two generations of adaptation. Kästner's novel was first adapted into a film in Germany in 1950, just 5 years after the end of the war, and the story's emotional resonance with a population that had been literally separated by borders, by displacement, by death, by the partition of Germany itself, gave it an immediate and powerful cultural meaning that went well beyond its surface narrative of a children's summer camp adventure. The idea of two halves of a family, separated by forces they could not control, finding each other and refusing to remain apart, spoke to the lived experience of millions of European families in that post-war moment in ways that are difficult to fully appreciate from a distance of decades. Walt Disney Studios acquired the rights to Kästner's story in the 1950s and produced the first American adaptation in 1961, starring Hallie Mills in the dual role of the twins. The 1961 version was a significant commercial success, and introduced the story to American audiences who had no knowledge of the German original. It was very much a film of its moment, the early 1960s, when the post-war baby boom had produced a generation of children who were themselves the product of families reshaped by war, by migration, and by the social disruptions of the preceding decades. Hallie Mills became one of the defining child stars of that era, and the film's vision of a wholesome, optimistic America where broken families could be repaired was deeply in tune with the cultural mood of early Kennedy-era America. By the time Nancy Meyers and Charles Shire began developing their 1998 remake, the story had already demonstrated its remarkable adaptability across 3 languages, 3 countries, and nearly 5 decades of social change. The question Meyers brought to the project was not simply how to update the visual language and cultural references of the 1961 film, but how to honor the deeper emotional truth of Kästner's original story, a truth about identity, belonging, and the refusal to accept permanent separation, while grounding it in a world that the children of 1998 would recognize as their own. 1949. Erich Kästner publishes Das Doppeltlächeln in post-war Germany. The story of twins separated by divorce resonates powerfully with a Europe still reeling from family separations caused by war, displacement, and the emerging division of the continent. 1950. The first film adaptation is released in West Germany, directed by Joseph von Backe. It becomes one of the most beloved German children's films of the post-war era and is translated and screened across Europe. 1961. Walt Disney Studios releases the first American adaptation, The Parent Trap, starring Hallie Mills. The film wins a Special Academy Award for its technical visual effects work on the twin scenes, an unprecedented achievement in split-screen photography for its era. 1986 to 1989. Two television movie sequels to the 1961 film are produced, both starring Hallie Mills reprising her role. These sequels demonstrate the enduring appetite for the original story but also the creative exhaustion of the 1961 version's specific world. 1998. Nancy Meyers directs the definitive modern reimagining. The film expands the story's geographic ambition with a transatlantic setting, updates its social context to reflect the divorce culture of the 1990s, and introduces Lindsay Lohan to the world. Part 2. The Social Climate of 1998. What America looked like when this film was made. The Parent Trap was released in the summer of 1998, and to understand why it landed the way it did with American audiences, it is essential to understand the specific social and cultural climate of the United States at that moment. The 1990s were a decade defined, among many other things, by a profound national reckoning with divorce and its effects on children. The divorce rate in the United States had risen dramatically through the 1970s and 1980s, reaching a peak in the early 1980s and remaining extremely high through the following decade. By 1998, a very significant proportion of American children were growing up in households shaped by divorce, either in single-parent homes, or in blended families with step-parents and step-siblings, or moving between two separate households as part of shared custody arrangements. This was the generation that went to see The Parent Trap in the summer of 1998, and the film spoke to their experience with a directness that was unusual in mainstream Hollywood family entertainment. Hallie and Annie are not presented as damaged or tragic figures despite the separation they have endured. They are presented as capable, intelligent, funny, emotionally resourceful children who are dealing creatively with a situation they did not choose. The film does not moralize about divorce, does not condemn Nick and Elizabeth for their choices, and does not present the children as helpless victims of adult failure. Instead, it presents them as agents of their own family's repair, children who love their parents enough to fight for the family those parents were unable to maintain on their own. This framing was culturally significant in 1998 in ways that are easy to underestimate from a later vantage point. The popular cultural conversation about divorce and children in that era was often heavily weighted toward the damage model. The idea that divorce inevitably and irreparably harmed children, that children of divorce carried permanent deficits in their emotional development and their capacity for relationships. The Parent Trap offered a different vision of children who were resilient, creative, loving, and fully capable of defining their own relationship to their family's story rather than being simply defined by it. The film also arrived at a specific moment in the evolution of the blended family as a cultural subject. The character of Meredith Blake, the ambitious, child-rejecting girlfriend who threatens the twins' plan, tapped directly into anxieties that were very present in American culture about step-parents, about the introduction of new romantic partners into families with children, and about the question of whether children's emotional needs would be prioritized or sidelined when their parents formed new relationships. Meredith is not a monster. She is a recognizable type, and the satisfaction audiences took in her defeat was not merely comedic. It was the satisfaction of seeing a particular kind of adult selfishness named, confronted, and overcome. Part 3. Transatlantic identity. Britain, America, and the cultural geography of the film. One of the most deliberate and culturally meaningful decisions Nancy Meyers made in her reimagining of the story was to give the two twins genuinely different national identities rather than simply different regional American identities. In the 1961 original, both girls are American, one is from California, one is from Boston. The cultural gap between them is real but relatively modest. In the 1998 version, Annie is British and Hallie is American, and the transatlantic divide between their two worlds is one of the most richly developed elements of the entire film. This decision was historically and culturally loaded in ways that the film wears lightly but that are worth examining closely. The relationship between Britain and America in the late 1990s was a particularly warm one. The special relationship between the two countries had been refreshed in the post-Cold War era, and culturally, there was a genuine and enthusiastic traffic between British and American popular culture. British bands, actors, and television formats were enormously successful in America, while American films, music, and cultural exports dominated the British market. The idea of a child who was perfectly at home in both worlds, who could speak both languages, inhabit both cultures, and move between them with ease, had a particular appeal in this cultural moment that it might not have had in a different era. The film also made very specific choices about which version of Britain and which version of America it chose to represent. Annie's London is Knightsbridge at its most beautiful, elegant Georgian townhouses, immaculate interiors, a fashion design studio that looks like something from a glossy magazine. It is a vision of British culture that is aspirational and romantic, stripped of the grittier realities of actual London life in the late 1990s. Similarly, Hallie's California is Napa Valley at its most cinematically golden, rolling vineyards, warm light, horses, and the specific kind of prosperous outdoor beauty that represents an idealized version of California rather than its complex social reality. These idealized geographies are not failures of the film. They are deliberate aesthetic choices that serve the story's emotional logic. The film is about two worlds that are each incomplete without the other, and it needed both worlds to be genuinely beautiful and genuinely desirable for the emotional weight of the twins' situation to register properly. If Annie's London had been gray and rainy and Hallie's California had been traffic-choked and mundane, the sense of what both girls were missing would have been considerably diminished. Instead, both worlds are presented as versions of paradise, and the film's emotional argument is that paradise, when it is divided, is not paradise at all. Part 4. Themes of Deep Cultural Significance. What the film is really about, beneath the surface. Identity. The question of who you are when half of yourself is missing. At its philosophical core, The Parent Trap is a film about identity. Specifically, about the terrifying incompleteness of an identity that has been constructed on a foundation of deliberate omission. Both Hallie and Annie have grown up believing themselves to be whole people, and in practical terms they function perfectly well as individuals. But the film argues, in every scene it builds toward the moment of discovery, that a person who does not know their own twin is a person who does not fully know themselves. The twins represent two halves of a single identity. Hallie is action and instinct and California warmth, Annie is reflection and precision and European culture, and neither half alone constitutes a complete person. This idea of the divided self, of identity as something that requires the acknowledgement of its own hidden halves, is one of the deepest and most enduring themes in the literature of identity across cultures and centuries, and the film engages with it through the specific, accessible language of a children's comedy with remarkable seriousness. Class and social status. The quiet class politics embedded in the film's two worlds. The Parent Trap is a film set almost entirely among wealthy, successful, beautiful people, and this is not accidental. Both Nick Parker and Elizabeth James are prosperous professionals, a successful winemaker and an internationally recognized fashion designer, and both live in environments of considerable comfort and aesthetic refinement. The film does not examine class in any explicit or analytical way, but it encodes class assumptions at every level of its visual and narrative language. The threat posed by Meredith Blake is partly about her unsuitability as a stepmother and partly about the specific kind of social ambition she represents. She is interested in Nick's money and status in a way that the film identifies as crass and self-serving. The film's emotional resolution depends on the audience believing that Nick and Elizabeth's love for each other is genuine and class-transcendent, that it operates at a level above the calculations of social advancement. This is itself a culturally specific fantasy that says a great deal about the values that American family entertainment in the late 1990s wanted to project and affirm. Children's agency. The radical idea that children can be the architects of adult decisions. One of the most culturally significant aspects of The Parent Trap is its treatment of children as agents rather than subjects. In most family films of the era, children are the people to whom things happen. They are protected, threatened, rescued, and ultimately delivered back to safety by the actions of adults. In The Parent Trap, the relationship is essentially reversed. The adults, Nick and Elizabeth, are the people who made the original mistake of separating, and it is the children who identify that mistake, devise a plan to correct it, execute that plan across multiple continents with considerable ingenuity and courage, and ultimately bring about the resolution. The adults are not incapable or stupid, they are simply emotionally paralyzed by their own history, and they need their children to do what they cannot do for themselves. This inversion of the conventional adult-child power dynamic was both unusual and deeply satisfying for young audiences, and it reflects a broader cultural shift in the 1990s toward taking children's perspectives and children's emotional intelligence more seriously than previous generations had done. Nostalgia and romantic idealism. The film's relationship to its own 1961 original and to a romanticized past. The 1998 Parent Trap is a film that is deeply in love with the idea of the past, not in a regressive or uncritical way, but in a specific mode of romantic longing that understands the past as a place where possibilities were still open. Nick and Elizabeth fell in love on a ship. They were young and everything was possible. The divorce closed those possibilities, and the entire emotional architecture of the film is built around the proposition that some closed possibilities can be reopened, that the love that existed before failure can survive failure and emerge from the other side of it still intact. This is a profoundly hopeful and, in some lights, a profoundly sentimental argument, and the film knows it. It makes this argument not through logical persuasion but through the specific emotional texture of its images. The golden light of Napa, the warmth of a London evening, the romance of an ocean liner at sea. Nancy Meyers understood that nostalgia is not merely a sentiment, but a moral claim, a claim that some things are worth preserving, that some losses are worth mourning, and that some separations should never have happened. Female ambition and independence. What Elizabeth James represented for women in 1998. Elizabeth James is, in cultural historical terms, a quietly radical figure for a 1998 Disney family film. She is a single mother who has built, entirely on her own, an internationally successful and creatively distinguished career. She lives independently, manages a household and a business simultaneously, raises her daughter with warmth and engagement, and shows no signs of needing a man to complete or rescue her. The film does not frame her singleness as a problem or her career as a compensation for loneliness. It presents her as a fully realized adult woman whose life, though it contains an absence she has lived around rather than through, is genuinely her own. When Nick and Elizabeth reunite at the film's end, the reunion is not Elizabeth being saved or completed by a man. It is two autonomous adults choosing each other freely, after years of separation, with full knowledge of each other's faults. This distinction matters culturally because it means that the film's romantic resolution does not require Elizabeth to diminish herself, to give up her career, or to be returned to a state of dependence. She gets to be both the reunited wife and the successful designer, and the film presents this not as a contradiction but as an entirely natural outcome. Part 5. Musical and Visual Culture. The soundtrack, the aesthetics, and the cultural moment they captured. The Parent Trap made highly deliberate and culturally loaded choices about its musical identity. Rather than scoring the film with the kind of contemporary 1990s pop that was then dominating the teen and family film market, Nancy Meyers chose to anchor the film's emotional moments in classic songs from the 1950s and 1960s, the era in which Nick and Elizabeth would have grown up, and therefore the era whose music carried the most emotional weight for the story of a love that had been buried for more than a decade. This choice was historically resonant in a specific way. The songs that play during the film's most tender romantic scenes between Nick and Elizabeth are songs that belong to a particular moment in American cultural history, the post-war golden age of popular music, and by using them in 1998 the film was making a claim about continuity, about the way that the emotional experiences of one generation persist in the musical memory of the next. The visual aesthetic of the film was equally deliberate in its cultural positioning. Director of photography Dean Cundey, who had worked with directors including John Carpenter and Robert Zemeckis on some of the defining visual experiences of the 1970s and 1980s, gave the film a warm, richly saturated look that was consciously at odds with the cooler, more ironic visual style that much of late 1990s Hollywood favored. The cinematography of The Parent Trap looks almost amber in its warmth, particularly the Napa Valley sequences, which are lit and framed with a golden softness that evokes not just the beauty of wine country but the specific quality of a certain kind of romantic memory. This visual warmth was a cultural statement as well as an aesthetic one, a declaration that the film intended to make its audience feel something unguarded and genuine in an era when emotional openness in popular culture was often regarded with ironic suspicion. The production design, led by Dean Tavoularis, drew extensively on the specific visual vocabularies of two very different cultural worlds: the understated British elegance of Knightsbridge interiors, all warm wood and carefully chosen objects, and the accumulated personality of a home that has been genuinely lived in, and the open, sun-warmed California modernism of the Parker Vineyard. All horizontal lines and natural materials, and the expansive spatial confidence of a life lived largely outdoors. These two aesthetic worlds were so precisely differentiated in the film that audiences who did not speak a word of English could have identified which twin belonged to which world simply by looking at the environments in which they moved. The film's costume design, by Penny Rose, made equally culturally specific choices. Annie's London wardrobe is impeccably tailored and classically European, the kind of clothing that speaks of quality, of tradition, of a certain considered relationship between the wearer and what she puts on her body. Hallie's California wardrobe is casual, sporty, and comfortable, denim and flannel and the studied informality of someone for whom clothes are functional rather than expressive. These visual codes are so precisely drawn that the switch between the twins is registered as much through costume and bearing as through dialogue and accent, and they draw on very real cultural stereotypes about American and British relationships to clothing, formality, and self-presentation that carry genuine historical depth. The Parent Trap succeeded culturally because it understood something that many family films of its era did not, that children and their parents are both carrying the same story, just from different ends of it. The film gave both generations something to recognize in themselves, and that double recognition is the rarest and most valuable thing a piece of popular culture can achieve. Part 6. Legacy and Lasting Cultural Footprint. What the film left behind and why it endures. The cultural legacy of the 1998 Parent Trap is, by any measure, extraordinary for a film of its budget and apparent simplicity. More than 25 years after its release, it remains one of the most frequently referenced, most affectionately remembered, and most consistently rewatched family films of the late 20th century. It appears regularly on lists of the greatest Disney live-action films ever made. It is taught in film courses as an example of technically sophisticated split-screen photography. It is cited by filmmakers including Nancy Meyers as one of the works they are most proud of. And it continues to find genuinely new audiences through Disney+, introducing the story to children who were not yet born when the film was first released. The film's cultural footprint is particularly deep among the generation that grew up watching it in the late 1990s and early 2000s. For this generation, the elder millennials who were approximately 10 to 15 years old when the film came out, The Parent Trap occupies a place in the emotional memory that is unusually vivid and unusually personal. It is a film that people in this generation remember not just watching but feeling, and the specific texture of those feelings. The warmth of the Napa sequences, the excitement of the discovery scene, the satisfaction of Meredith's defeat, the tenderness of Nick and Elizabeth's reunion, has remained remarkably intact across decades of individual life change. This is what distinguishes a film with genuine cultural staying power from a film that is merely commercially successful: the ability to remain emotionally legible and emotionally alive across the enormous changes that time and experience bring to the person watching it. The film also had a specific and lasting impact on the cultural geography of Napa Valley. The image of the Parker Vineyard, warm, golden, beautiful, romantic, contributed meaningfully to the popular imagination of Napa as a place of particular American Idol, and this image has been reinforced by the many other films and television productions that have subsequently used wine country as a backdrop for romantic and family stories. Napa Valley's wine tourism industry expanded significantly through the late 1990s and 2000s, and while The Parent Trap is obviously not solely responsible for that expansion, its contribution to the popular romance of the region was real and has been noted by people in the wine tourism industry. Finally, the film's cultural legacy is inseparable from the career and the story of Lindsay Lohan, whose performance in The Parent Trap remains the role by which she is most universally known and most warmly remembered. The film introduced her to the world as a child of extraordinary talent, and the arc of her story since then, the success, the difficulties, and the genuine and determined comeback that has been underway since the early 2020s, has given The Parent Trap an additional layer of cultural meaning that it did not have when it was first released. Watching the film today, knowing everything that has followed, the performance of an 11-year-old Lindsay Lohan carries a weight and a poignancy that is its own distinct form of historical experience. The Parent Trap, 1998, is, in the fullest historical and cultural sense, a film that belongs to its moment, to post-war storytelling traditions, to the divorce culture of the 1990s, to the transatlantic cultural exchange of the late 20th century, to the specific romantic idealism of Nancy Meyers' cinema. And yet it is also, unmistakably, a film that transcends its moment, that speaks to experiences and longings that are not specific to any decade or any culture, but belong to the permanent inventory of what human beings feel about family, about loss, about identity, and about the hope that what has been broken can sometimes, against all reasonable expectation, be made whole again. And that, right there, is The Parent Trap. A film that was released in the summer of 1998, was seen by millions of people around the world, and has never really left any of them since. That is not something that happens by accident. That is what it looks like when a story is told exactly right, when every piece of it, from the writing to the performances to the way the light falls on a California vineyard in the late afternoon, is working together toward a single, clear, honest emotional truth. The truth that families can be broken. And the truth that sometimes, against all reasonable expectation, they can be made whole again. What strikes me most about this film, every single time I watch it, is what Nancy Meyers understood about children that a lot of filmmakers simply do not. She understood that children are not passive. They are not the people to whom things happen. They are the people who decide, with a clarity and a courage that adults often lose somewhere along the way, that the world is not fixed, that the things that have gone wrong can be fought, and that love, applied with enough determination and enough ingenuity, is a force that can actually change things. Hallie and Annie Parker James did not wait for their parents to figure it out. They went across an ocean and they figured it out themselves. And the film honors them for it completely. I also want to take a moment to talk about Lindsay Lohan. Because I think it is very easy, 25 years later, to watch The Parent Trap and take what she does in it for granted. To watch an 11-year-old girl play two entirely distinct characters in the same frame, with two different accents, two different sets of mannerisms, two completely different emotional histories, and to just accept it as given, because the film is so smooth and so confident that it never draws attention to the difficulty of what is being accomplished. But stop for a moment and think about what that actually required of a child who had never stood in front of a movie camera before in her life. The technical discipline, the emotional range, the sheer sustained concentration of holding two people inside yourself simultaneously and giving each of them exactly what they need, scene after scene, take after take, across months of production. It is extraordinary work. And it deserves to be called what it is, one of the finest debut performances in the history of modern Hollywood cinema. And then there is Natasha Richardson, who brought to the role of Elizabeth James a quality that I find myself thinking about long after the film ends, a quality of contained intelligence, of warmth held in careful reserve, of a woman who has built a full and meaningful life around an absence she has never fully stopped feeling. Richardson was one of the greatest stage and screen actresses of her generation, a woman who came from the most celebrated theatrical family in Britain and who honored that inheritance every time she performed. She died in 2009, at 45 years old, far too young, in a skiing accident in Canada. And The Parent Trap is one of the films that audiences return to again and again, not just because it is a great film but because it is a place where she is still alive, still warm, still present, still smiling at a daughter she has just found again after too many years apart. Some performances outlive the people who gave them. Hers is one of them. Now I want to hear from you. Because this channel exists for people who love cinema the way I love cinema. People who do not just watch films but feel them, who carry them around for years, who find themselves thinking about a particular scene or a particular line or a particular moment of light at completely unexpected points in their ordinary lives. If The Parent Trap is one of those films for you, and based on everything I know about the people who watch this channel, I am willing to bet that for a lot of you it is, then I want to know about it. Tell me in the comments. Tell me what scene gets you every time. Tell me which twin you related to more when you first saw it. Tell me where you were and how old you were and who you watched it with. Those details matter. Those stories are part of what this film is. They are part of the reason it has lasted as long as it has. And if you are new here, if this video is the first thing you have ever seen from Cinematic Movie Insider, then welcome. Genuinely. This channel is built on one simple belief, that the films we love deserve to be talked about with the same seriousness and the same passion that went into making them. We do not do quick takes here. We do not do hot opinions designed to generate arguments. We sit with films. We think about them carefully. We try to understand not just what they are but why they matter, why they last, and what they are actually saying to us beneath the surface of their plots and their performances. If that sounds like something you are interested in, then you are in exactly the right place.